Ladies and gentlemen, we have a very special guest tonight. You can see his mug up in the top right. That is CF Jingara from CF Jingara on YouTube, who is live on location in Canberra. And you're going to be talking about some of the fire threats in your region. And I'm going to be asking you some questions about what's going on. So, according to the first article I'm going to be putting up here, the ACT to maintain watch over fires in surrounds as Southeast New South Wales braces for new fire threats. Canberra also, smoke can be seen, according to this alert page I found here. And the Canberra fires, according to an article I just found, CF, were sparked by a military helicopter, and one of the planes just crashed and killed 3 U.S. firefighters. What else could go wrong?
Yeah.
Welcome to the show.
Thanks, mate. It's been a bit of a challenging couple of weeks down here in the first few weeks of January. The fires have been very hard to stop because there's been very little rain. The temperature's been very high. That article around the Coulson firefighters that crashed, that was only about 38 kilometres away from me to the south. Unfortunately, the news around what's happened with that C-130 hasn't come out yet. I don't think they'll release it publicly for a while. But the other big fire that's occurred in the Australian Capital Territory National Park is that the Defence Force had landed a MRH-90 helicopter to do some inspections of some of their equipment out there and in preparation for other fires in the region. And it turns out their landing lights run a bit hot. And because the landing light was actually sitting in the grass, it actually sparked the fire, and the fire enveloped the underneath of the helicopter, and they had to take off, and they just left this trail of fire behind them. So that fire's turned into a 15,000 hectare fire. The smoke has covered most of Canberra and all of the suburbs. The fire's about 5 kilometres away from the suburbs of Canberra, and the weather that's coming in the next 3 to 4 days is what I would classify getting it up into that catastrophic level where that fire is going to move, and it's going to move in a big way.
So let me get this straight. The majority of fires in the beginning of the season were started by arsonists and stupid tourists. And now we have a follow-up on accidents lighting even more fires. And what the good news is that the climate change alarmists have quieted down.
Yeah, well, they've finally realised that, fires don't get started by climate change. They get started by either arsonists or stupid people or lightning. And in this case, our Defence Force ended up being the stupid people.
Now let's jump right into the coronavirus, because that's what's on everyone's mind. You guys over there in Australia, as near as I can tell, have 5 cases. We have 5 cases over here in the U.S. What information coming from there, from the burn zone, do you have on the coronavirus?
Yeah, so the coronavirus is now up to 7 cases here in Australia, and the Australian government has set up a remote hospital on one of our islands to our north, and we're actually evacuating our people from China at the moment, and they're going to be going straight to that island for a quarantine period of 14 days.
Like where you keep the
other thing that's occurred is
right?
that. Yeah, well, no, it's more lepers. It's more that's that island in particular is used to stop people coming over via boat, and when any illegal immigrants come to the country, they're generally put onto that island for their processing. But from the other perspective, the Department of Health has set up their large reaction response team to this event, and there are 2 universities now, University of Queensland and one of the universities in Victoria, have they've built the virus in their labs from the information that came out of China and they're already working on ways to treat the virus. Interestingly, in today's news, the health minister and one of the senior members of the government were saying that they are treating this virus as less contagious than measles, but there is still a risk, obviously.
Yeah, and that was what I just heard, that the actual Australia was able to replicate the virus. I don't know if that's good or bad. And the fact that it might be less transmittable than measles is kind of good. But the fact that the cat is out of the bag and there are so many people with this virus now, it might be actually beyond containment. And in my eyes, I think we're about 50-50 here beyond containment. What do you think?
Yeah, and look, the reality is it's one of those viruses that has the opportunity to evolve. And that's part of the reason why there's been such a concern around this, is that coronaviruses do evolve fairly quickly. Things like the measles don't evolve that quickly at all, if at all. So these viruses, if they do transmit from human to human, there is the potential that each human's going to add a little bit of genomics to that virus where it could potentially change through your own immune system and the way it reacts to it. The other thing that I've found very interesting is that the amount of information around this virus it's been around for quite a while, and the actual exact strain of it has been around for quite a while, and it's just some of these things just don't add up. They really don't.
Yeah, fishy to say the least, and we'll say that, we'll leave that for another podcast. Now let's talk about the new virus that's going to pop up in Australia because of the fires. We'll call it the funnel web zombie apocalypse. What do you know about the funnel web spiders and how they've made it past the barrier of the burn zone and are now affecting the people in areas where there is no more life? Just a burnt, scorched earth and funnel web spiders.
So funnel web spiders have a very, very, very good protection mechanism in the fact that they generally nest under large rocks and in rocky areas and in the side of creek banks and places like that where it's generally not impacted by fire. So the fire's gone through, the rains have fallen, they've woken up because they're thinking, oh, it's summer, it's raining, it must be time to breed. And all the females are coming out, and they're the big ones that are really quite aggressive. But for all intents and purposes, all you got to do with funnel webs is make sure you check your shoes before you put your shoes on. When you're doing your laundry and all that sort of stuff, make sure you shake everything off properly when you've brought it in from outside. There's a lot of simple ways of dealing with them, but they are the most venomous spider on the planet. And in some circumstances, some people have died within 15 minutes of being bitten by one. They are highly aggressive, and their fangs are actually disgustingly long and inflict an enormous pain when they actually hit you. And so when you've been bitten by one, because they'll go straight through your shoes, they'll go through your boot, they'll go through leather gloves. They're very, very, very painful by all accounts. And interestingly, dogs and cats and things like that aren't affected by them.
Well, we can actually learn something from the funnel web spider. They're one of the few biological creatures that made it. And just like you said, they burrow into the ground. So there is a depth in the ground that surface fires don't affect you. And they're even burrowing into the sides of rivers, like the old, there are stories from the 1700s here in Philadelphia where the poor people and the old people, they would actually burrow into the sides of the river because it was easy to dig in there, and they just became, that's almost where the term hermit came from.
Yeah, that soft sand makes it very easy for them to dig into it. There's a whole series of spiders and wildlife here in Australia, even birds that will dig into the sides of the creek banks and the rivers where the deposited sand has been eroded away, and it's nice and easy for them to dig into. It's generally still got some moisture in it, keeps them cool. And so, there's a lot of things that survive that way. Many snakes have survived as well. There's been a large number of snakes that have been coming out since the fires and are getting into people's backyards as well. So the amount of reports of eastern brown snakes, which are in the top 10 venomous snakes on the planet, quite common as well. I certainly haven't seen any snakes here at all this year, but at my parents' place down the road, they've had 10 to 20 times what they would normally have.
Now, Giles, Canberra is not out of the woods from Namagdi bushfires as extreme weather conditions loom. You sent me this link. What is on the horizon?
Yeah, so the Namadgi fire is that one that was started by the helicopter. It is burning in the Namadgi National Park, and that is the Brindabella Mountains, which reside over the top of Canberra. And those mountain ranges haven't burnt in a large bushfire since 2003, although the Australian Capital Territory, RFS, have done good strategic backburns in many of the previous seasons. The area where the fire started wasn't burnt off. It wasn't reduced in its hazards. And unfortunately, that's the main reason why we're getting so much heat out of it. The other thing is that, that area hasn't had any real rain for 4 months. And so it's a tinderbox. The other big problem that we've got there is that there are certain trees there which will light up a foot-long piece of bark, and that bark will then carry all the way in the upper plume for 4 or 5 and between 4 or 5 up to 20 kilometres away, and it's still hot and it'll land on the ground and create spot fires. So this weekend coming for me, that fire is directly west of my property, and there is the potential on Saturday afternoon for that fire showing on the screen there to blow embers all the way to my property, and I'll have to be fighting spot fires all around the property.
Yeah,
so my fingers are crossed.
Yeah,
it's not going to happen.
We're praying for you. It looks like there are millions of people in the way here, and I can see right behind you the winds are kicking up, and they appear to be 10, 20 kilometers per hour. Is that what they're blowing at?
Yeah, look, today's pretty quiet. I'm under a nice shaded area here, but tomorrow the winds will be 40 to 50 k's an hour. On Saturday, they'll be 60 to 70. And then on Sunday, there's going to be a potential for a thunderstorm to join in on this conversation. And when it does that, it's going to be a strong convergence line of hot and cold. And it'll be lining right up between the hot on the fires and the cool coming in from the east. And right over the mountain range that I live on, there'll be a convergence line where this thunderstorm's going to run. And there's a lot of potential for lightning, and starting by dry lightning and then getting some fairly heavy rain after that. So I'm really hoping that the rain gets here before any fires start in the area.
Well, let's talk about the rain, and let's talk about the flooding and what we are expecting to happen, because the monsoons did come late there and they're just starting. What is in store? Because a massive amount has been burned. And so we're going to have all this flooding, and then there's the pandemic, and then the funnel web spiders. What else is next?
Locust plague's next, I think. Yeah, so effectively what's been happening is that the monsoon came in about 3 weeks later than it normally does. It's good that it arrived. It hasn't arrived in some previous years. And the north of the country is getting good rains. Now, most of those areas that burnt up in Queensland didn't burn with the same ferocity as the fires down south, and so they've had less issues with the flooding after fire. But they are certainly getting some floods. One part of Queensland had 529 millimetres of rain in one day. Now, I'm not going to do the calculations into inches for you on that, but it's a hell of a lot. It's half a metre effectively of rain in one day. So all of those large creeks and rivers flooded and have really set up the north for what could be a good crop period during winter.
Yes, and in fact, I heard it even affected gravity, and children are levitating. Is that true?
Good on you, mate.
So let's talk about the bushfires in southern New South Wales and how they're sparking a race against time to save the billion-dollar timber industry. I glanced over this article, and it appears as if the timber industry is dead. I mean, it literally got burnt to dead.
Yeah, it did. And I live in a I live in an area where there's a substantial amount of logging in the Talaganda State Forest nearby here, and the people who live in town nearby are really, really highly concerned because they've only got one compartment of timber left, and there are the risk of all the fires coming in the next week or so taking that out. But across the state and across Victoria as well, there are large swaths of these plantation areas and regrowth timber areas, which are parts of the economy of the country that are just have been laid waste by these fires. Now, again, these forests and these plantations aren't always managed very well either, and so they don't reduce a large amount of the fuel load. They don't thin the trees. They don't prune the trees as you would in a highly managed farm forestry setup. They've left them too close, and so the fire just roars through them, and there's nothing left but fine sticks. So unfortunately, it's going to take a big hit to the state economies of New South Wales and Victoria. And yes, the industry is just about gone.
Yeah, we can blame it on the greenies. It's always the greenies' fault. Well, I don't even know what that means, but I know what it means. And so most of those forests are burnt, and they will be able to be replanted. It will regrow. This is not the apocalypse or the end of the world. It's a major setback. So we have this huge setback in the economy of Australia, where the logging industry and the wood industry is burnt, the farming industry is affected, the hunting, tourism, and now we have petrol and fresh food prices spiking. But the inflation rates remain low. Now, this is because central banks and our ability to manipulate the pricing. But at some point, this is all going to come to a quick and rapid end. And I think that maybe this pandemic is a way to gain control on the borders and the markets. As we approach the final words here, and as petrol and fresh food prices are spiking in your region, Giles, what is your outlook for the future of your country, for the future moving into the grand solar minimum, the magnetic reversal, and the future in the coming weeks of this pandemic?
Yeah, so what I'll do is I'll work on a timeline from now moving forward. Looking at the pandemic, I think as a country, because we are an island and that we have fairly strong borders, we have got some fairly strong controls around our health system as well. We don't have the same problems in health that many other countries have got, because we've got universal healthcare here, and so the system's well set up to look after people from a health perspective. We are one of the leading nations in the world, according to the World Health Organization, and I think we will weather the pandemic fairly well, noting that we will have likely limited numbers of people coming into Australia now who are actually infected, and there has been no cross-infection of the virus here in Australia so far as has been advertised. It's possible that it's occurred and it hasn't been advertised, but I think the reporting here is pretty good. From a grand solar minimum perspective and the future economy of the country, I think the rebuilding plans that are in place now for the thousands of houses and the tens of thousands of barns and sheds is moving forward. The contracts are being signed by the government now to get large companies to come in, and the government's paying for the cleanup. And this is the surprising thing. So the government's decided to throw out $2 billion to these companies to go in and to clean up all of the old houses that are burnt and all the old sheds, clean them all up and take them all away at no cost to the landholder. And so that's a good thing, because that will actually allow people to rebuild without that $35,000 to $40,000 cost of that cleanup, because there are a whole number of houses that have burnt that have had asbestos in them as well. So that's a major concern for those people cleaning it up, and it would have cost them twice as much to clean that up. Moving forward into the grand solar minimum, it's a real concern that we are still very much a city voting country. There's very few people in the actual remote areas of Australia that get much influence The people who live in remote parts of Australia will survive. We can survive fires, we can survive floods, we can survive many circumstances like are being thrown at us, and we want to continue living here. The people in the cities are the problems. Many of our cities have got limited roads in and out of them, and as the shit hits the fan, eventually you wouldn't want to be anywhere near them like you would over in the States. I think Australia will weather the Grand Solar minimum fairly well, unless there is a power issue, and the power issue will be the biggest thing, because we're so reliant on refrigeration out here because it's so hot.
That's hot. So we're praying for you that the fire here in Canberra does not send sparks your way. We're praying for the people in Canberra. We're praying that the coronavirus has not mutated. And and if you don't know who CF Jingara is, come over to his YouTube page and subscribe now. If you listen to the show and you didn't subscribe, your YouTube channel will self-destruct. Thank you for joining us, CF. And we'll see you next time. We love you.
Thank you, Diamond. Love you too, mate. Take care.
Be safe.